everybody. It's Monday, October 4th, and that means it's time for another episode of Chatting with Agnes and Cecilia, Nonprofit Conversations. Just a word to our audience, Agnes won't be chatting as much today because her voice needs to rest. She has a little bit of a sore throat, but she will say a few words. We're back again with Kimberly Stansell, who was with us last year during the lockdown, and now she's back to give us an update about what's going on in the events and meetings industry as we're coming out of the COVID era. So welcome back, Kimberly. I want to throw it over to my co-host and friend Agnes to introduce herself and say hello.
Thank you, Cecilia, for that introduction. And yes, my voice is taking a little bit of a rest. My name is Agnes Amos Coleman. I'm an author and a consultant. And to our global audience, wherever you're joining us from, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Over to you, Cecilia.
Thank you, Agnes. And please do chime in if you feel that your voice can do it. So thanks for being here today, Agnes, because I know how it is to have a sore throat. So, but we are delighted that Kimberly Stansell could join us again, and I want to throw it over to Kimberly so she can introduce herself and say a few words.
Well, thank you, Cecilia and Agnes, for inviting me back again. I was on your show originally a year ago, this time last year, so I appreciate the opportunity. I'm Kimberly Stansell, and I'm an independent meetings and events strategist. I specialize in producing meetings and events in the healthcare and technology sector.
Well, that's great. And boy, what exciting sectors to be working with. And I know it's probably been challenging the last year and a half working on events and conferences. So Kimberly, what do you think the current state of the industry is?
That's a great question. Our industry has evolved from how can we start meeting again, how can we start working again, to how can we continue to produce meetings and events and conferences with health and safety as our #1 priority? So we've evolved from not producing events, not delivering events, to actually doing so using different business models to deliver engagement and content to audiences, because people love to meet in person. And so the industry, it's still evolving. We're not back to where we were prior to the pandemic, but the industry definitely has evolved and people are meeting again.
Well, what are some of these changes that you're seeing that have kind of been evolving since the lockdown is not over completely, I guess, but the major restrictions of nobody being together are now gone. But so what are some of the changes that you have seen in putting these in-person meetings together?
So what's happened more so in the evolution of meeting again is that more and more organizations are producing what are called hybrid events. Mm-hmm. So a hybrid event is where you take a live in-person meeting, you have in-person attendees, you have content, you have agenda, you have panels, you have live entertainment, you have music, and then you couple that with a virtual component that allows a virtual audience of attendees to participate in your event wherever they may be. So the hybrid events are really dominant at this time, and they've allowed more and more people to still come together and stay engaged. But the #1 thing with a hybrid event is engagement is key. You have to keep both audiences very engaged in what you're delivering.
And that's great that we are talking about hybrid meetings, because earlier this year, I took the certification course at the Virtual Event Institute. And not being a meeting professional like you and Agnes, I found it really enlightening and learned a lot. And they talked a lot about hybrid meetings, and their definition was exactly what you said. And they also emphasized that need for the engagement. So do you have any suggestions about how you can engage the virtual part of your audience at a hybrid event?
So the interesting thing, so it's wonderful to be able to participate in an event wherever you may be, but there are a couple of pitfalls. Sometimes when people are participating in virtual events, they have a tendency to be multitasking. I'm guilty of that. And sometimes being online for hours at a time It's a big time commitment, and there's a challenge in keeping people's attention. So what a lot of conference producers and meeting producers do is that the trend is towards shorter, compelling content. And then they use gamification. And then sometimes with a hybrid event, the content and the delivery is not the same throughout the entire meeting or event for both audiences. So I'll use WEC. WEC, which is World Education Congress, which is the annual conference produced by Meetings Professional International. Last year in 2020 and again in 2021, our annual conference, WEC, was delivered as a hybrid event. So some of the content, some of the breakout sessions the first year were pre-recorded. So to enhance the engagement the second year, the breakout sessions for the virtual audience were actually live with live Q&A. And so that's another way to keep that audience engaged. So those presenters for those breakout sessions agreed to deliver, on one hand, they agreed to deliver the in-person live to those who were there on site, and then they agreed to repeat that breakout session live for the virtual audience. So that's another way to keep the audience engaged. Another thing they did at WEC, which I loved, was they took the virtual audience and they motivated people. They said, hey, we're going to have you on camera. So they did a photo gallery of some of the virtual attendees, and they streamed that live into the general session with the in-person attendees. And the virtual audience was able to ask questions during the Q&A of the live in-person session. So that's another form of engagement. But engagement is key because, again, being online, participating in a conference for long hours or long segments at a time can be challenging for some people. And so having shorter, compelling sessions is a trend.
That is a great idea of running the photos of the virtual attendees and then letting them ask questions. Again, not being a professional like you and Agnes, I had not even thought about that. I do a lot of online presentations and trainings, but that sort of engagement for that many people in person, online, how do you get them to interact with each other? So there's been a lot of changes, obviously, and we all know that. So what do you think, Kimberly, are some of the things that we will retain from what I think people will refer back to as an odd period of time in our lives here on this planet, 2020 into 2021, as we're starting to come out again into the world? What are some of the things you think people will continue to do that are positive things from this period?
Well, definitely the health and safety protocols. It's been interesting to see how venues have really evolved their programs. Most hotels, or all hotels actually, they have, clean programs and how they keep their venue safe and clean. But with the pandemic, we had to step that up because we're trying to stop the transmission of a virus. And so the health and safety protocols, I believe, are here to stay. It will be more modified. And I think that as groups continue to go on site and host in-person events, they'll have the flexibility to what extent they would like to have certain protocols in place. So that's definitely, I think, here to stay. The other thing too is I believe that with a lot of the content development and the engagement for meetings and events and conferences, there will be more emphasis placed on health and wellness, specifically mental health. Being isolated, being locked down, a lot of people not working, a lot of people not being able to engage in their communities as they had in the past has taken a mental toll. And I think that that's something that as a nation and globally as a world, that will be something that everyone will be dealing with for a while. And so that will be a factor in when you have a meeting, an event. Being isolated has really changed people's perception of how they work and why they work, and who they work with and where they work. So I think that has really changed, and that will impact how we go forward.
Well, those
No,
are
and
really interesting. Agnes, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, that's okay. And that really just leads me to the role of the meeting planner or the strategic meeting planner. Share with us, Kimberly, how this role has changed and evolved, and how they can help their organizations or associations manage this complexity of the role post-COVID era, because the job description, I know from my experience, it's not about doing their job as a planner now. It's about helping their organizations make their attendees safe. And that's, I'm interested in hearing your perspective on this.
Yeah, that's a great question. I appreciate your point of view. So looking at the role of a planner, meeting planners have always had a broad skill set, and our role from being a planner over the last several years has evolved into being a strategist. So we're strategic partners, we're event producers, we're meeting strategists. And so that role is just even further expanded. And the number one area where I would encourage a meeting and event strategist or planner is to be very well versed on health and safety protocols, because that is here to stay and it's very important. And some experts predict that we will have another pandemic. So it's very important to be well versed on health and safety protocols and be able to advise your stakeholders, your meeting sponsors on a strategy, and be able to provide examples of what different events have taken place, what different conferences have taken place. Also be able to advise them if they decide to go the route of a vaccination-proof policy for their event. So for example, HIMSS, which is a global health conference, they were one of the first major conferences to mandate or have a vaccination-proof policy for their conference. And they went through a very strategic process, getting legal advice, getting industry advice on what the implications and what the reaction would be to their attendees. So as a strategist, it's going to be very important for you to understand, like, if we decide to have on-site testing, who's going to manage that? If we're going to have a vaccination-proof policy, how are we going to communicate that and when? And then if we're going to do that, then on the flip side, can we offer the virtual component, and how will we execute that? So that's number one. Number two, event design is going to be very important, and is very important for meeting and event strategists now, because shorter, compelling content is really the way to go. And then keeping people engaged, whether it be through gamification, whether it be from instant polling, whether it be from virtual audience participation. We have to factor all those things in when we're designing an event, and tie that into how will that impact the return on investment for this particular event, and be able to communicate that and articulate that very clearly to your stakeholders and your investors. So those are two critical components.
Well, Kimberly, what happened? I'm sorry, Agnes, do you have a follow-up for that?
No. Great answer. Definitely there's an opportunity here for us as meeting strategists to learn from this best practices. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, that was a great question, because I do see it as evolving for everyone who are meeting and event planners like the two of you. Because I don't know if the audience is really aware of that, but that is Agnes's background, and she's very good at it. So Kimberly, what happens a lot with us humans, and it's a human thing, I think it's global, we tend to kind of fall back into our old habits. Mm-hmm. So despite the fact that we've done all these things, we've gotten better at virtual, we've all gotten better at being on webcam and doing things in real time. What's your opinion? Do you think that a lot of organizations that do events and conferences might try to flee back to, January 2020 or 2019? Do you think that they will drop the hybrid part? What is your take on that?
I think that organizations and sponsors of meetings, events, and conferences, they'll make a strategic decision because for some organizations and some meetings, the hybrid component doesn't make sense. It's not compatible with the type of meeting that you're producing. It just doesn't make sense. So I think that hybrid will always be an option, but every meeting and event and conference may not have the hybrid business model. So people will have options, but for now, because again, we are still in the middle of the pandemic, and we have different variants coming up. We have sectors of our society that are resistant to vaccinations. So everything is still evolving. The information is still fluid, and the outcomes are still fluid. So we're all still learning and revamping and tweaking as we go along. But the key thing is to stay agile and your approach and in your thinking, because everything is still fluid, and our clients, our business partners, our stakeholders, they count on us to be strategic thought leaders in this space. And so we have to be flexible, we have to be agile, and we need to be very well informed.
I think that's an excellent summary, Kimberly. And I am a student of Sun Tzu, The Art of War, and that is the most classic strategy book of all time. And really what Sun Tzu says in that book is we must always be open to finding opportunities.
Yeah.
So if you haven't read the book, that's pretty much what he's telling you. So that is a great conversation, Kimberly. And we're at the point, unfortunately, where we have to wrap up. And we love to ask our guest, what is a thought that you would like the audience to take away from this conversation today?
Well, when I visited with you last year, I shared that it was important for everyone in the industry, to stay informed, stay connected, and stay encouraged. And I still believe that. And whenever I post something, I use those as my hashtags. And tying into that point is that even though the industry, we're meeting again and people are working again and becoming engaged, there are still a lot of professionals who have not had an opportunity to re-engage with the industry for over 18 months. And I would just encourage everyone in the industry, don't forget about our peers, our colleagues, our business partners who are not back out. They're not in the game right now. And I just would encourage people to not necessarily just ping someone through LinkedIn or send them a text or an email, but pick up the phone and call people and see how they're doing. You might be able to listen to someone and they can tell you what their strategy has been and trying to find a job. And then you could help them kind of rethink that strategy. But just check on our other colleagues and friends, because so many people who are very talented, who have wonderful portfolios of work, have not been connected with an opportunity, and they're not working. And so everything is still evolving, it's still fleshing itself out. And this too shall pass, but it hasn't passed yet. So just be a thoughtful partner and check on our colleagues. That's what I want to encourage people.
That is great. I'm so glad you said that. I do try to do that occasionally, but I'm probably not doing it as much as I should. So thanks for that, Kimberly, because I do know I love getting a text from somebody I haven't heard from for a while, or a phone call. So that's great. So Kimberly, if people want to get in touch with you and talk more about events and conferences, what's the best way to reach you?
The best way to reach me is through my LinkedIn profile. I'm very responsive. I'm very engaged on LinkedIn. And that's the best way to reach me, is through LinkedIn.
Well, great. Well, Kimberly, we want to thank you again. Kimberly Stansell, everyone, back after a whole year, which I can't believe we waited this long to have you back. You should have been here sooner. So it's been a great conversation. We'll make sure it's not a year next time. And thanks for sharing all your insights and observations with our global audience today. So we do have to go rogue for now, but on behalf of myself and Agnes, my co-host. Thanks for listening or watching. You may be watching us on YouTube. You may be listening to us on your favorite podcast service. We're available at both venues. Check out our website, roguetulips.com, if you want to learn more about the company. And we will be back next time with another exciting conversation for the nonprofit community. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.